All right, I will put myself on mute.
Okay. All right, so we'll get started. Okay, so we left off in our last exciting episode, which was a couple of weeks ago already. We were talking about the Shema and its blessings. I wanted to add a couple of things that I thought about since last time, and one thing that I found that's new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the blessing formula here. I think this is the blessing formula here. Oh, wrong one for that. Okay, stop. Here we go. Okay. So here we have the blessings before the Shema in the evening. So I just want to focus on the opening words, which I talked about last time. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. So Baruch, I had said, is really an adjective that describes God as having a special numinous power, right? That God has this, we're recognizing the special power of God. And then it's atah, which means you, and Yud He Vav He, which is God's name. Eloheinu means our God, Melech HaOlam, literally king of the universe. And I found a new translation of these opening words in a modern idiom, and I thought it's just beautiful. I'm going to see if I can memorize it and use it from now on. So instead of saying blessed are you, because as we talked about before, what does it mean to say God is blessed? He really has this special power. So here's what the new translation says. You are bountiful. I love that word, bountiful, right? You have bountiful powers. You are bountiful. And then instead of Adonai, which is not really what Yud He Vav He is, we said it which was kind of maybe too informal. He uses the word infinite instead of Yud He Vav He. That is a beautiful idea. So why is that? So let's look at the word that God's name is. God's name is Yud He Vav He. One of the problems is we don't know how to pronounce that name because we're not supposed to pronounce it, and so the exact pronunciation was lost. What does that mean? Well, we know, of course, what the consonants are, what the letters are, Yud He Vav He, but we don't know what the vowels are supposed to be because there's no vowels in the text. So how you pronounce the word depends on what vowels you put in there. So as you probably know, in many Bible scholars believe that it was supposed, I'm going to say this even though we're not supposed to, many people say, that scholars say that it was supposed to be pronounced Yahweh, right? And so in the textbooks in high school or middle school that our kids read, the state, in public schools, when it talks about the different religions, it talks about the God of the Jews is Yahweh. And all the Jewish kids would come to class after reading that in the book, and they'd ask me, who is this Yahweh person? I've never heard of him before because we don't pronounce the name. But that's only a scholar's guess that Yahweh was supposed to be how you pronounce that. That's based on the idea that the letter Vav originally had a Wah sound. Wah and Va are both labial sounds. They're both pronounced with our lips. And linguists say they're very related. And some say that originally the Vav was actually more like a Wah than a Va. So Yahweh, right, would be how it was pronounced. However, even though we don't know how it was supposed to be pronounced, we do know or have an idea what it means. How do we know that? Because all Hebrew words come from almost all of them are based on 3-letter Hebrew roots. Okay, so the trick is to figure out what 3 letters make up the root of the word, and then you have an idea of what the meaning of the word is. So in the case of Yud He Vav He, oddly enough, all 3 of those letters, Yud He Vav, are not often considered root letters, which some scholars make a big deal. God's name is based on these letters that aren't ordinarily root letters. But Since we have to figure out which three letters are the root. The assumption is the root letters are Hey, Vav, Hey. Vav and Yud are often interchangeable, just the way it is. They're kind of both used as vowels sometimes. We know this because Vav can mean U or O if you put a dot over it or beside it. And Yud, of course, often has E sound. So they're also kind of vowel sounds. So Vav and Yud are interchangeable. I hope everybody's paying attention or able to follow this. So Hey, Vav, Hey comes out in modern Hebrew as Hey, Yud, Hey, Haya, which means was. And if you wanted to say in the future tense of the verb to be, right, was is past tense. Future tense to be is Yehiyeh, will be. Same three-letter roots. Hey, Yud, Hey. Haya, was, Yehiyeh, will be. And you can also make the present tense conjugation of the verb to be, Hoveh, is. It's never used in modern English because when you want to say is, it's just assumed in the words. For instance, Hayeled Tov, the boy is good. We don't say Hayeled Hoveh Tov. We don't say he is good because it would sound weird. It's just implied. But when you want to say is, and like philosophically exists, you would say Hoveh. And we know this from a prayer that we recite or we sing in services. Hu Haya, he was. Hu Hoveh, he is. Vehu Yehiyeh, right? And he will be, right? It's, I think, from Adon Olam. Hu Haya, Hu Hoveh, Hu Yehiyeh, right? B'tifara. He was, he is, he will always be in glory. So that's conjugating that verb to be. Well, to be, right, the three letters, Hey, Vav, Hey, are the root letters for God's name. So God's name comes from this idea of a being. He is, so there's a lot of ways to play with that. God is the ultimate being. He is the being, the source of all being. Or he is the existent one. He exists. He always existed. He will always exist. He is the existent one. He is the ultimate source of existence, the source of being, right? All of those ideas are kind of wrapped up in this formal name for God. And so this modern translation takes that and says, God is the infinite, right? So that's another way to describe being, was, is, will be. God is infinite. Right? So he just translates God's name into infinite. So he says, Baruch atah, you are bountiful. Adonai, or Yud He Vav He, he says infinite. Eloheinu, our God. And then he translates Melech HaOlam. He doesn't want to use the word king because that implies an old man sitting on a throne, or at least a male person. And of course, God is neither male nor female, and certainly doesn't have a form of a king sitting on a throne. So how do you translate that without giving that connotation? He says majesty, right? So majesty reflects the royalness of God without giving it any physicality. And then Melech HaOlam, so this is an interesting word in Hebrew. Olam, as many people know, can mean forever. Le'olam means forever, but olam also means universe, like space, which is another fascinating thing that in ancient Hebrew, long before Einstein, we had this idea in the Hebrew language that time and space are related, and the infiniteness of time and space are captured with the same word, olam, right? It's really fascinating. So he is majesty of space and time. That's the way the new translation goes. I love this. So putting it all together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, he translates as, you are bountiful, infinite, infinite as in God's name. You are bountiful, infinite, our God, majesty of space and time. And I just thought that's what a creative way to capture those ideas in non-physical terms and really make us think about those opening words. Just the opening words of every blessing we recite say a tremendous amount about how we understand the creator, the source of the universe. You are bountiful, infinite our God, majesty of space and time. So anyway, so that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing, I referred to the angels praising God, and the movie City of Angels, where they had that picture where all the angels are facing towards the rising sun and they're singing God's blessings and praises. And that certainly is what the opening blessing of the Shema is supposed to remind us of, or have us think about, that sort of an image. But I'm not a person that believes in angels personally. I'm certainly not beings with wings that flutter around and all that. So let's go back to what our ancestors, some of our ancestors used to think. We think they used to look up at the sky at night and they would see the stars. And they thought of the stars as somehow God's angels, they're divine beings, the sources of light that sort of flutter around in God's heaven, right? Again, they didn't understand really what they were looking at, but that's how they imagined it. So based on that idea, one way that I think about angels is they are manifestations of God's creation. And particularly, thinking about the awesomeness and the grandeur of all of God's creation, including the universe. So when I think about the angels proclaiming God's holiness, proclaiming God's greatness, it's that idea that, wow, there's a whole universe out there that really does, in a tangible way, make us think about the awesomeness of God, right? They sing the awesomeness of God just by their existence, and knowing, as we do, the tremendous distance and space and power and grandeur of the entire universe. That sings God's greatness. Or in a more, if you're musically oriented, there's the music of the spheres. That again comes from the idea that the spheres were the orbs that surrounded the earth, where the sun, moon, and stars, rotated around. So the music of the spheres, if you think in celestial terms of music of space, that also sings God's greatness, right? The imagined music that's being made by those beings out in space. In any case, another way to think about it.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. When you say you don't believe in angels, no, that's, how do you explain when Abraham is visited by 3 angels?
Well, okay, good question. Yeah, so there's different ways of thinking about those stories. So just taking the story on its face value, that he had these 3 visitors. On a simple reading of the text, I would say that they were 3 people, human beings, who were individually inspired by God to visit Abraham in his illness, to give that one of the ideas that each one of them had a particular mission. So they're visiting him in his illness, bikur cholim, right, to help him feel better. Yeah. And then they're announcing, oh, by the way, I got this idea in my head from God that your wife, Sarah, who is very old and hasn't had a child yet, is going to have a child, right? And then the third one says, I got this idea in my head, which I believe is from God, that there's a city down the street from you, there's 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, that are really evil, and they're going to get destroyed.
So would you consider them more prophets if God is speaking to them?
Yeah, I mean, look, so the Hebrew word for angel is malach, and malach is sometimes translated as a messenger. And even like Maimonides would say, angels are messengers. They are deliverers of a message or a force from God. They're how God transmits something into the physical universe. And so in this case, I would say they're messengers in the form of human beings.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna put myself back on mute.
Okay. That's just me. I mean, other people have different opinions about the subject. That's how I would translate it. Okay, so let's go back to the blessings we were looking at. So we looked at blessings before the Shema, and we left off with Ahavat Olam and Ahava Rabbah, that God loves us so much, he gave us the commandments. And then we said the first paragraph of the Shema says we should love God with all our heart, soul, and might. So we return God loves us so much, he gave us rules to follow to make our lives holy. And we in turn love God so much, we're going to follow those rules, which make our lives holy, right? That's what the second blessing before the Shema and the first paragraph of the Shema kind of mirror each other in that way. The second, okay, I got to go to the other text. So let's do this. So let's take a look at the second paragraph of the Shema. Oh, whoops, that didn't work. There we go. Okay. So we talked about Yud Hey Vav Hey and the Yud Yud abbreviation. Okay, here's the first paragraph of the Shema over here. This is the second paragraph of the Shema, and it talks about reward and punishment. That's what the tradition says is the reason for it being here. If you obey God's commandments, right, then I will grant the rain in your land in its season, early rain and late rain, and you'll gather new grain and wine and oil, and the grass will provide and for your cattle, and you'll eat your fill. You'll be living a good life. But if you don't follow my commandments and you serve other gods, then God's anger will flare against you, and the ground won't yield its rain, and you'll soon perish from the land that God has given you. Therefore, keep these words on your heart. And here it repeats ideas from that first paragraph of the Shema. Bind them as a sign on your hands, set them as a symbol before your eyes. Teach them to your children day and night, when you're at home and when away, when you lie down and rise up. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that you swore to your father to assign to them as long as there is a heaven on earth. So it ends with all these mnemonic devices that were in the first paragraph of the Shema. And my personal view is, and again, we don't know when these three paragraphs were put together, but my view is that the three paragraphs were put together because they're all about mnemonic devices. They're all about reminders to us that we should be constantly thinking about the fact that we live in a created world. And isn't that magnificent? It's not random chance. There's a purpose and a meaning to life. There's a purpose and a meaning to our lives. And if we follow these rules, that's how we can provide the meaning in our lives. And it's just pounding this message home, and then in good psychological practice, giving us these mnemonic devices that constantly remind us throughout the day that this is the way it is. So in the morning, we put on tefillin, so it's always in our thoughts. We put it on our arms, so it's always in our deeds. We put it on the doorposts of our house, so when we enter the house and come home, we pass by the mezuzah and remember we have to treat our family nicely. We have to treat our home well. Our home is a place where hopefully God dwells. And then when we leave the house, we pass by the same mezuzah. We go out into the world, not so often right now, but if we go shopping or whatever our bit work is, wherever we're going on the way, we pass by that mezuzah and are reminded that everything we do outside of the house, we are also representatives of God. We need to behave in an appropriate way, and we need to sanctify God in our lives and in the world around us, in everything we do outside the house. So we have all these mnemonic devices, and that's what the reason these paragraphs were put together for. Daniel, you had a question?
Yeah, and I don't want to take you off track.
That's okay.
And let me give an example rather than trying to ask this question, which I've asked a million times to a million different rabbis. If I want to start a fire, I'm going to collect the wood. It's going to be dry. I'm going to put it down on the ground. I'm going to take lighter fluid and pour it on it. And I'm going to take my match and I'm going to stand back and I'm going to strike it and I'm going to throw it on the fire. And the fire is going to burst up and I'm going to get all warm because I'm outside and it's cold. Okay?
Right.
It would sound strange to say that that wood and that fuel and that match rewarded me with warmth. It's just the process. It's just the way the universe works. So when you look at the Shema and you do all of these things, this is what happens, is the fire and the process of starting that fire. It's not that it's a reward. It's just, if you do this thing, you're going to get warm. If you don't do these things, you're going to freeze. It's
Right.
the way the universe works. And with
Right.
that, I'll shut up.
Right. So you're saying, look, there isn't really reward and punishment. I think you're saying that. Heresy, but I'm going to come back in a second. Right? There's no reward and punishment. Actually, what happens is a natural consequence of what you yourself did, right? That's so now that I call it heresy, I will say that that is exactly how I read Maimonides, right? Maimonides basically says that. He, and maybe another, well, I'm going to be doing a class by this, just so you all know. When this ends, which is going to be May 3rd, I'm going to switch over, and starting May 10th, I'm going to do unorthodox Jewish beliefs. And as part of that, we'll look at Maimonides on this particular subject, where he basically says there is no reward and punishment. He kind of disguises it because he doesn't want to upset Jews. But he basically says there is no reward and punishment because reward and punishment are artificial. There's like, what is the reward for doing your homework? You get an, well, you get an A. That's not artificial. But if your parents are giving you candy bars or dollar bills for every A on your report card, there's no inherent relationship between your doing well and getting the candy bar. Your parents artificially associated those two things together. That's what makes it a reward. It's something artificial, a benefit that you get for having done something. And Maimonides says that's not how God works. God doesn't artificially give you paradise because you were a good person on earth. He doesn't artificially put you in fiery brimstone hell because you were bad. What happens is the consequences of your actions naturally propel you in the direction of having what he considers a reward or punishment based on how you behaved in this world. And I won't give away the story. You'll have to come back for the class. But that he basically would say what you're saying. So yeah. So I guess
I don't know how to take down my hand. So.
Oh, okay. I took it down the notice on my thing. I think there's a way to do that, but
all right, never mind. Let's not go there. I'll.
Okay, so here's but that's good. I'm glad you brought that back because that brings us back to this second paragraph, which is talking about reward and punishment, which I don't believe in. Apparently, Daniel, you don't believe in either, right? So what do we make of this paragraph? When I said I think the reason it's here is because of the last part where it's talking about the mnemonic devices. But nevertheless, the first part of it is what the tradition focuses on, which is about reward and punishment. If you do what God wants you to do, you'll be living a good life here in this world, right? You will get tangible benefits in this world. And if you live a bad life, you will be punished in this world. You'll have famine and starvation. That, I think, first of all, is one reason why in our synagogue, and probably many conservative synagogues, we don't do this paragraph out loud. You'll notice that we do the first paragraph out loud. We do the third paragraph about wearing a talit out loud, but I don't know very many conservative synagogues that chant the middle paragraph out loud. And I think one reason is because it is challenging theologically. We just doesn't see, why is this challenging? Because it's not the world we see. And particularly today, we know really good people who are getting this COVID virus. Did they deserve that? It's because they didn't obey commandments? I mean, Heaven forbid that we should think that. So, so how do we interpret this? Well, one of my teachers said there is a way to sort of read this paragraph with some integrity, personal integrity. And that is just to understand, he said this, by the way, almost 30 years ago now, and it's even more so today. If we take care of the planet, it will provide food for us. If we don't take care of the planet, there will be climate change. And that's going to mess up, in a very dramatic and drastic way, our ability to continue to survive, both in terms of getting food and having wood and everything else. If you harvest all the trees in the world, you won't have any more wood. If you don't take care of the planet, you'll have climate change and it'll be hard for crops to grow. So part of what God's commandments are is the commandment to take care of the planet. And you can read this paragraph that way as a reminder that part of our responsibility is to make sure that the grain continues to grow in its season. Any questions about that? So now we come to the third paragraph, which is again a mnemonic device. This time it's about wearing fringes on the corners of our garments. Let me, you had mentioned you wanted to look at the Hebrew a little more. Is that something people are interested in? Vayomer, so here's a little grammar trick about biblical Hebrew. This is not modern Hebrew, but biblical Hebrew. Sometimes the vav at the beginning of a verb, vav normally means and, the means and. But sometimes the vav at the beginning of a Hebrew word in biblical Hebrew it actually changes the tense of the verb from past tense to future tense, or if it's a future tense conjugation, it converts it from a future tense verb to a past tense verb. Everybody with me so far? So yomer is actually in the future tense. The yud at the beginning usually indicates third person singular future. So he will speak. But the vav flips the tense to past tense. So vayomer makes it and he spoke. Okay? Just a little grammar trick. You'll see this happens a lot. You'll get used to it. Vayomer, and he spoke. Who spoke? Well, again, frequently in particularly biblical Hebrew, we put the subject of the verb after the verb itself. In English, we always like to put the subject first. God spoke. But in Hebrew, it could be, and he spoke God, right? So God spoke to Moses, saying, Daber, this is the command form of Vayidaber, command form, speak. Moses, you speak, right? El B'nai Israel, to the children of Israel. Is this grammar, by the way, helpful to people? Or people want the grammar? Yes? So here's a little grammar trick here also. I hadn't thought about doing this, but, oh, somebody's chatting here. Wait, let me get back to the chat thing. How do I read the chat? There. Thank you, Rabbi. Have another class? Oh, right. You are the host now. Okay, so just a little grammar thing here. Okay, so banim. So ben means son, right? Banim means sons, or because Hebrew is like Spanish and other languages, when all nouns have to be either masculine or feminine. And in the great patriarchal societies of yesteryear, if there were 100 women in the room and one man, we arbitrarily decide that the noun is going to be masculine, right? So you can have 100 children, 99 of them are daughters, one of them's a son, they're banim, right? We use the plural masculine. It's just the crazy way it was back then. Anyway, so banim is sons or children. Now, if you drop the mem, so there's no mem here, you drop the mem and you lengthen the vowel before it. So instead of banim, it becomes b'nei. Then it is children of. And it has to be followed by another noun. Children of whom? Children of Yisrael. Right? So b'nei Yisrael means the children of Israel. Is that grammar helpful? You'll see this come up like Elohei Avraham, right? Is you drop the mem from Elohim, you lengthen the vowel, Elohei Avraham. So God of Abraham, right? Or, well, anyway, let's go on. So children of Israel. So God, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, V'amarta alehem, asulahem tzitzit, you should make for them fringes, al kanfei begadehem, that they should put fringes on the corners. Kanaf, here is another one. Kanafim, kanaf is a corner, kanafim are corners. You drop that mem, kanafei means corners of, beged, beged is a garment, so begdehem is their garments. So put it on the corners of their garments, ledorotam, for all generations. V'natnu al tzitzit, and you should put on the fringe a kanaf, there's the singular, on the corner fringe, on the corner, the fringe of the corner, a patil techelet. Patil is a thread, and techelet is the color blue, a special blue. So you should put a blue thread on the corner of fringe. V'hayalachem letzitzit, and they will be for them fringes, uritem oto, and they should see them, uzechartem, and they should remember, et kol mitzvot Adonai, all of the commands of God, va'asitem otam, and they should do them. V'lo touch, here's the key thing, I'm going to tell you a story, maybe you heard it before. Lo taturu acharei levavchem, you should not veer off after what your hearts desire, ve'acharei einechem, and after what your eyes see. Don't stray to other things, right? Focus on God and what God wants. Asher atem zonim achareihem. And the word zonah, for those of you who don't know biblical Hebrew or in modern Hebrew, a zonah is a prostitute. So this is the verb, to go prostituting, right? What is it that your heart's desire and your eyes see? You know, things or people you shouldn't engage with, lust after, I guess, right? So don't, after you, so this is, we're all adults here, right? So how many people have heard this story before? There's a story that's told in the Talmud that's based on this verse, based on this peculiar word, zonim here, right? That there's this, a student in a study house who has these urges because he's young. And he decides he's going to have to take care of these urges that he has, and he didn't have pornography or whatever in those days, so he goes on, and he can't do it in a village that he's in because everybody would know him, so he has to go somewhere where he's not known. And I don't know how they did this in those days. There wasn't an internet, so people couldn't advertise on the internet. By the way, I'm a famous prostitute in Hotzenplotz, but somehow he knew that there was a famous prostitute in Hotzenplotz. So this is the story. I'm just telling you what it says in the Talmud. I'm not making this up. So he goes to this foreign town. He makes an appointment with her. And he gives her the money. And the Talmud's pretty elaborate. She has several different beds, and she's on the top bed, and she's wearing whatever. And he starts to take off his clothes, and he's wearing a talit. And his fringes slap him in the face. At which point, he remembers this verse, Lo taturu acharei levavchem. Don't turn aside after your heart's desire and what your eyes see, asher atem zonim achareihem, that you should prostitute yourself after them, right? And the tzitzit are reminding him not to do that. So he suddenly stops what he's doing and he says to this woman, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And she's like offended. What do you mean? I'm the best there is. You know, this is not, I'm not beautiful enough for you. And he says, no, it's got nothing to do with you. It's about me. I can't do this. I have to go. And so he just kind of walks out on her. right? So she's never had this experience before. I'm not making this up. It's in the Talmud. And she follows him. She stalks him all the way back to his hometown and finds his study house. And the master of the study house greets her at the door. I'm embellishing it very slightly. And she explains what she's doing there. And he says, oh, I know who you're talking about. I don't know how he knew that. And the two of them get together. And according to the Talmud, they end up getting married and they live happily ever after. So, so that was
there's a scene in the current show Unorthodox.
Oh, really?
For us who have seen it, that
very much like that, huh?
Very much came from that story, yes.
That's funny. Yeah, so I always thought the movie Pretty Woman was based on that, but who knows? Anyway, so that's a midrash based on this unusual word that you shouldn't go after what your heart, stray after what your heart desires to prostitute yourself. But it doesn't have to be sexual, right? What this really is about is, you know, you could prostitute yourself for money. You could prostitute yourself for power or for fame. Some people let all of these things go to their head, or for that people should idolize you, that people should see you as somehow brilliant or whatever they see in you that they admire. That it shouldn't let you get, none of these things should go to your head. Constantly remember that you are just a creature of God who has a purpose in the world to take care of the planet, to take care of others, right? And to do God's work. And the constant reminder of that is wearing these fringes on the corners of your garments. So let's go back to that. So you shall be for you a fringe, and you should look at it and recall the commandments of God and observe them and do them and not follow after your heart and eyes in lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded of to observe all my commandments and be holy to your God. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, your God. So a couple things now about this last part. Oh, so one thing is, how are the fringes supposed to remind you of the commandments? So the rabbis like to play the mnemonic game, the gematria game, right? Where you have each Hebrew letter has a number value. And so they take the word tzitzit, which is tzadi yud taf. Tzadi has the numerical value of 90. Yud has the numerical value of 10. So you have tzadi yud, that's 90, 10, 90, 10, that's 200. And taf has the value of 400. So you had 200, and now you have 400, which equals 600. So this is supposed to remind you of God's commandments, but there's 613 commandments. And now with tzitzit, we only have 600. Where do we get the extra 13 commandments? So the rabbis say, if you look at one of the corners, one of the fringes on the corners of the garment, you'll see that there are 8 threads, right? Four threads that are doubled over to make 8. And there are 5 sets of knots on the fringe. So the 5 sets of threads, 5 sets of knots, plus the 8 threads makes 13. So the fringes remind you of God's commandments. That's their mnemonic device for that. So anyway, so that's that story. Let's go back to the text again. So they're supposed to remind you of God's commandments. And then it ends with, I, the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. So this all of a sudden is talking about Egypt, kind of out of the blue. In the context here, I think the idea is, why do you have to observe the commandments? Because basically you owe me. This is maybe not the best parenting technique I've found, right? You can't say, obey me because I am your father, or obey me because I do all these things for you. That's usually not the best way. But it is one way that we can try to think about the fact that God has provided a magnificent universe, has given us life, has given us freedom. What a gift all of these things are, and we need to use these gifts in ways that provide meaning not only for our lives, but help to make God's world a better place. We do owe God, in fact, for that. So, so that's I think that's what the reason of that being there for. Or another way to look at it, since we're in the season between Passover and Shavuot, as you know, we count the days between our freedom of Passover and then getting the commandments at Mount Sinai. We count the days in between, connecting these two primary seminal moments in Jewish history. You know, both of them are necessary for understanding the essence of Judaism, the freedom from slavery, and then getting our commandments in relationship with God, how we're supposed to live our lives. So, so I always like to, I mean, I'm a big fan of Marvel Comics and Spider-Man in particular. So as we know, Spider-Man's uncle famously said, right, with great power comes great responsibility. And freedom is a tremendous power. Human beings, we believe, are the only creatures on the planet that really have free will. We can choose every single minute what we want to do, how we want to spend that minute of our lives, that hour of our lives, that day in our lives. We can choose to be good. We can choose to improve the world, to make lives better, or we can choose to make it miserable. We can choose to be selfish and arrogant. And every single day we can change. If we've always been a mean, obnoxious, arrogant person, tomorrow we can be different. Because we have free will. That is a tremendous, tremendous power that's given to human beings. But with great power comes great responsibility. How do we use that power? And so the freedom, the power that comes from Passover has to be channeled through the purpose of Sinai, right? The commandments, which help us to focus on how to be good, how to treat people with kindness and compassion, how to treat people with justice and fairness, how to take care of the planet. We have to channel that power into ways that are good. So the freedom, the power comes with responsibility, the commandments. And so the fact that God says, I took you out of Egypt not to be wild animals. I took you out of Egypt to train you to be my agents in the world as a force for good. And that's really what he's saying here at the end. One last thing on that, if you remember from the Passover Haggadah, there's a statement that says, you know, Rabbi Eliezer says, I was 70 years old and I never understood why we have to talk about the Exodus at night. And when I was a kid, I was like, what kind of a stupid question is that? The Seder is at night. Of course, we're going to talk about the Exodus at night. Why does he have this question in the middle of the Haggadah? And the answer is, it wasn't originally in the Haggadah. The statement comes from the Mishnah, and it comes from the Mishnah of Tractate Brachot, and it comes from the section in the Tractate of Brachot that's talking about reciting this paragraph at night. And what he's not asking, why do we do the Seder at night? He wouldn't ask such a dumb question. He's asking, why do we say the third paragraph of the Shema at night? And he's not asking about it because it talks about the Exodus from Egypt, even though that's the last line and that's how he describes the paragraph. He's just saying, why do we do that paragraph? Because it talks about fringes. And the fringes are only required to be worn during the daytime. They're not worn at night. And so his question was, do we have to say the third paragraph talking about fringes when we're not wearing them anymore? But the way he asked the question was, I didn't understand why we had to talk about the Exodus at night, right? And then, of course, the answer was given, Kol Yamei Chayecha, all the days of your life. The days includes all the days. The days of your life is the days. All the days of your life includes the evening. So yeah, talk about the fringes even though you're not wearing them. In any case, if you ever wondered, that's the answer to that question. Was there something else I wanted to say about this paragraph? Oh, let's see. Speaking of fringes. Oh yeah, about kissing them, right? So the custom now is to kiss, to gather the four corners up. By the way, in many of our prayers, we do acts that we talk about in the prayers. So we gather the four corners up, not during the Shema paragraphs itself, but the paragraph before the Shema, the Ahavat Olam, Ahava Rabbah paragraph that we cite in the morning. And when do we gather them? When we talk about God gathering the Jews up from the four corners of the world and bringing us safely to our land, right? And we usually now sing it to the tune of Hatikva, because it's kind of the idea of the Zionist movement that we're gathering in the exiles and bringing them to our homeland. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz. We should gather up from the four corners of the world. Well, kanaf, I said, was a corner. Arbe kanfot, havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz, right? It's from the four corners of the world, in this case. So as we ask God to gather us from the four corners of the world, we gather the four corners of our talit, right? We're doing it at the same time. That is a frequent thing that you see in our prayers. We do something that reflects the words that we're saying. So you've already gathered up the four corners, but now in the third paragraph, every time tzitzit is mentioned, there became accustomed to kiss the tzitzit, right? Every time it says tzitzit. And this I've learned recently was a relatively recent thing, only a few hundred years old. So that's pretty recent in Judaism. Before that, people generally followed what the commandment actually says, that you should look upon them and be reminded of God's commandments. And so many people would, after they gathered them up, when they recited that paragraph, when it says, look at them and remind yourself, you would actually look at them, because you're saying you should look at them. So you do look at them, but not kiss them. So kissing came somewhat later. And I think it was Moshe Isserles, right, who wrote the Ashkenazic commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He mentions this custom, and many people seem to be kissing their fringes. I don't really know where this came from, he says, but it's not a bad thing because it helps people feel more attached to the commandment of mitzvot, right? When you kiss something, that's when you show that you love it, right? You kiss your dogs, you kiss your kids, kissing is a sign of love and affection. So kissing the fringes means you have some affection for the commandment to wear fringes. He says, not a bad thing, not required. So you don't have to, but it became a very common custom to kiss the fringes. If you don't want to kiss them, you can at least look at them. And then, of course, Jews argue about everything. So there's another perspective that says, no, don't kiss it, because then you're making it like a talisman. You're like it's some kind of protective shield, which it's not. Yeah, so either way, however you like, you can do it or not, but that's the story of the fringes. Any questions so far? Okay. This is from Mishnah Megillah here. This text, can you see the text? I am sharing it, right? Yeah, okay. So the Shema may not be repeated, nor may anyone go before the ark, nor may priests raise their hands, that is the priestly blessing, nor may you read from the Torah, nor read a section from the prophets, the Haftarah, nor may they perform nor may they perform funeral halts, nor blessing for mourners, unless you have 10 people, right, a minyan. So certain things require a minyan. So one of the reasons that we don't take the Torah scroll out of the ark lately is because there isn't a minyan in the sanctuary. So we just read the Torah passage from the Chumash. Taking the Torah out and reading it from the Torah is like a ritual reading of the Torah, and that requires a minyan. The Haftarah also requires a minyan, although some people, again, you can read it from the Chumash, but without blessings. And the priestly blessing, the priests don't go up and do the priestly blessing unless we have a minyan. But now I want to come to the beginning part here. Is the Shema may not be repeated. And then going before the ark, that is the rabbinic language for doing the repetition of the Amidah. We don't do the repetition of the Amidah by a prayer leader unless there's a minyan, so we haven't been doing that. What does it mean, though, to repeat the Shema? So the Hebrew is ein porsin et Shema. You don't, this word pores actually means to divide the Shema. So scholars are a little bit unsure what this meant, but it was clearly refers to some kind of technical proclamation of the Shema that was done in the temple. So in the formal prayer worship service, the Shema was done in a particular performative way, and that way was only supposed to be done if you had a minyan. We don't do that anymore per se, and so for 2,000 years, we've kind of lost the memory of exactly how it was performed. One scholar, I think Reuven Kimmel, there's two different ways that thought of that it's done. One would be that the leader would say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and then the congregation would repeat it, right? So that would be porsin. The reader would recite it first, and then the congregation would respond. We do that, right, in the Torah service, when we take the Torah out. That's exactly how we do it in the Torah service. The person holding the Torah says Shema Yisrael, and then the congregation responds, Shema Yisrael. So, but that's not for purposes of doing the Shema, that's as part of the Torah service. In any case, we don't do that unless we have a minyan, because we don't do the Torah service unless we have a minyan. So that may be the porsin et Shema. That's one way to understand what that means. The other way was that perhaps the leader would say, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, and then the congregation would respond, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, right? God is our God, God alone, right? So the leader would call out Shema Yisrael, and the congregation knew to respond with the end of the verse. Those are two possible ways that porsin et Shema was understood. But whatever it is, we don't technically do that anymore in the liturgy. So there's that.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I've always wondered why a minyan is 10 men. Why?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, patriarchal world, so that's A. B, the rabbis came up with an excuse, which was, again, in the patriarchal world, men were considered to have communal responsibilities, whereas women were not necessarily considered to have communal responsibilities. One way they expressed that idea was that women were not obligated for what they called positive time-bound commandments. Positive commandments as opposed to negative commandments. I don't like that terminology. So what they really meant was obligations, responsibilities. Those are the positive commandments, the things you are required to do. And prohibitions, those are what they call the negative commandments, things you're not supposed to do. So I like to think of them as obligations and prohibitions.
But why the number 10?
All right, I'll come to that in a second. So women were exempt from having to do obligations that had a specific set time. So for instance, the fringes, which I said are only obligatory during the day, was considered to have a set time, even though the whole day you could wear fringes. Nevertheless, they said only the day, not the night. Therefore, it's fixed in time. Therefore, women do not have to wear fringes. The tefillin are not worn on the Shabbat and festivals. And even though you can wear it the whole rest of the week, they had a fixed time because they weren't on Shabbat and festivals. So women are exempt from wearing tefillin. And then there's a whole literature about whether, well, if women are exempt from having to do those commandments, does that mean they're prohibited from doing those mitzvot? And naturally, Jews differed, and there were different opinions. But some said, yeah, if a woman wants to do it, go ahead. They even had an example of a famous woman, Michal Bat Kushi, who put on tefillin and nobody objected, right? So she wore tefillin and it was not a problem. So if women want to wear tefillin, they should be able to do it. Our movement, of course, has removed the gender distinctions. And now we not only say women are permitted to do these things, but almost obligated, almost obligated. It's like we don't want to recognize gender distinctions. In the world we live in today, men and women should be treated equally in all matters. And therefore, really, women should put on tefillin, put on a talit, wear a kippah, because we don't want to maintain unnecessary gender distinctions where they're not required. Some women, of course, are not comfortable with that. And so my view is, although I encourage women to do it, I don't require women to do it. Now, why 10? So there's a there's a verse which I don't remember the citation for, which basically says that God's holiness is recognized in the presence of a community. And I don't remember the exact terminology of the verse, but that's it. So God's holiness is recognized in the presence of a community. And that was the basis for saying certain things which would promote God's holiness should only be done when you have a community. So then the question is, what constitutes a minimum community? And there are a few different Torah sources for determining it, but one of them is the story of Abraham, which we talked about just earlier. The visitors come and say, God's going to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. What do you think about that, Abe? And Abraham argues with God. What do you mean, God? You're the judge of all the universe. Shouldn't you do justice? Can you destroy an entire city if there's 50 righteous people? And God says, okay, I won't destroy for 50. And then, as we know, Abraham argues him down. What about 45? What about 40? What about 30? What about 20? And finally, Abraham says, well, what about 10? If there's 10 righteous people in the city of Sodom, are you going to destroy the city? And God said, no, for the sake of 10, I will spare the city. And of course, he didn't find 10. So, but because they ended with 10, that was considered the minimum for creating a community. And that's one of the bases. There are a couple of other ones, but that's the one I like. And so based on that, 10 is the minimum for having a community. If you don't have 10, you really don't have a functioning community. And so certain things can only be done when you have that basic kernel of a community.
Thank you.
Any question so far?
I had one, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Do you know of any synagogues, I won't say Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, any synagogues that require all adults on Saturday morning to wear a tallis? All adults.
Well, first of all, so let's talk about only Jews, because there's no requirement.
I'm sorry. I meant to say that. All adult Jews.
Right, yeah. So, and this is one of the things I try to explain to the conversion class, although if they missed the class session where I talk about it, they might have missed it. But just like a bar mitzvah boy or girl traditionally doesn't wear the big talit, the prayer talit, until the day of their bar bat mitzvah. That's the ceremony. No, now I'm commanded. So now that I'm commanded, I'm going to wear the mitzvot that remind me of the commandments. Many of them, as you know, in the Orthodox world, the boys at least wear the undergarment that is also fringes, but the big prayer shawl is reserved for the bar mitzvah. So also people who aren't Jewish yet, who are planning to convert, I say it's a nice thing to hold off on that until you're formally Jewish, because then it has special significance that you're now doing this as a commanded person. So are there any synagogues that require all Jews to wear a talit? There may be some, particularly in New York or Los Angeles, sort of the more liberal communities, where they insist that we are decidedly egalitarian, and we believe that women should wear a talit. The original responsa of Joel Roth, who is one of our major legal authorities about 30 years ago. He's still alive, but his opinions have now kind of seem more on the traditional end of the spectrum. At the time, he was at the liberal end of the spectrum. And his opinion that said women can become rabbis, that was the one that was finally accepted by the Jewish Theological Seminary. His argument was, if you want to be a woman rabbi, this is basically what he said, then you need to affirmatively accept all of the positive time-bound commandments, because basically you are saying we want to take on all of those responsibilities that were not necessarily required of women, but you affirmatively stepping forward and saying, I want to take on these I will observe. I now feel responsible to do these mitzvot also, even though I wasn't originally obligated. And once you put yourself in that position of obligating yourself, that's what makes you able to be a rabbi.
Okay. Rabbi? Rabbi,
Yeah.
you hear me? At
Yes.
Israel, men do not wear a tallis until they're married.
Yeah, so there is another tradition, and I don't remember which way. There's an Ashkenazic custom, I believe, but I'm not sure which countries exactly. But so there's another tradition that men don't wear a talit until they're married, and that probably was originally the idea was, again, you're talking about an Orthodox congregation. There's a mechitza. The men and the women are on opposite sides, and even though the mechitza was there so people wouldn't look at each other, once you create that situation, it's human nature, they're going to look at each other. So so the women are going to look over the mechitza to the men might steal a glance over to the women. But in any case, if you were a woman who was looking for a partner, it would be easy to distinguish who was an eligible bachelor by the men who were not wearing a talit. That may have been one of the reasons for that.
Same thing with the shadel.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. Women didn't have to cover their head until they were married, and that would sort of signify who was an eligible bachelorette. So there may have been a matchmaking element to that. There may have been some other reasons for that, but in any case, there is a custom in some communities of not wearing the big talit until you're married. Okay. Where were we now? Let's see. Go back to.
Did you know that?
What?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so here's just another from this text over here. This is from a different tractate of the Mishnah, just a little piece of where we got some of our prayers from. So the priests standing in the courtyard, when the priests and the people standing in the courtyard, when they heard the explicit name, that is God's name, come from the mouth of the high priest. Remember, we do this on Yom Kippur. It's in a dramatic part of the service in the morning. We actually recite these words. And when the people heard the high priest pronounce God's name on the Holy of Holies, on the holiest day of the year, they would bend their knees and bow and fall on their faces, and they would say, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. That's what they would say. So based on that, right, that's exactly what we say after we say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We say God's name, and then in an undertone, we repeat that expression, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Right, that's how that entered into the prayers. This actually also entered into prayers because when the rabbi said, when you say Shema Yisrael, you're not just saying that God is one, you are also acknowledging that God is the sole creator of everything. And because God is the sole creator of everything, he is the supreme majesty, as that new translation would say, Melech HaOlam, right? King of the universe. He was the supreme majesty. And they wanted to get that idea of majesty across as part of saying the Shema, so they made it explicit by having us recite quietly, Malchuto, his majesty is forever. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else on this page that's worth looking at. Oh, yeah, so the last thing is from Mishnah Tamid. which is explaining how the temple service functioned. So the appointed priest would say to them, say one blessing, which we assume is the one right before the Shema, Ahavat Olam, and they blessed, so that they do that bracha. Then they recite the 10 Commandments, which we don't do anymore. So there's a whole article about why we don't do the 10 Commandments in our prayers anymore. And then they would do Shema, and then they do Vahaya im Shemoah, that's the second paragraph, and then they do Vayomer, the third paragraph. Right, so already by the time of the temple, these 3 paragraphs are put together. We don't know why. And then they bless the people with the 3 blessings, Emet v'yatziv, which is what follows the Shema, and ends with Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. And then they did Avodah, which is toward the end of the Amidah. That is the Amidah, right? The blessing of the Shemona Esrei, calling for God to accept the service. And then the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. And on Shabbat, they added a blessing for the watcher that was leaving. So this is a very early form of Jewish prayer, where you have the Shema, the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, 1 blessing before it, 1 blessing after it, and the Shemona Esrei kind of alluded to here, and then the Birkat Kohanim. So that's from very early form of the prayers. Now we had a question. Somebody have a question still? Okay, so so next week, why don't we look at the one more thing? We'll look at the last couple blessings after the Shema, perhaps, and then we'll have 1 or 2 classes where we can talk about the Amidah, and then we'll go on to the next class, which will start on May 10th. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's very enjoyable. I think this is a great class. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I learned a lot.
Okay, super. That's great. Thank you. All right. Well, so we'll keep going. We'll see you again next week.
Yes, God willing.
Thank you.
Stay safe and healthy.
You too.
Okay.
You too.
All right,
Okay,
bye.
bye-bye.
Thanks.